Actually, good morning or good evening, no matter where you are. So welcome to the today's pair distinguished lecture to be conducted by Professor Kathryn Ann Moler. Before we get started, I'd like just to give you a very brief introduction of today's organizer, that's the PolyU Academy for Interdisciplinary Research, or PAIR. My name is Qingyan Chen. I am the director of PAIR. So PAIR is a research institution within PolyU, which consists of 11 research institutes and 5 research centers. So we conduct research on the interdisciplinary field, which addresses to the most important societal impact, try to create some good solutions of society. And now I would like to ask our Deputy President and Provost, Professor P. Wang, to give a introductory remarks. Professor Wang, please.
Thank you, Qingyan. Good afternoon. On behalf of the Hong Kong Polytechnic Universities, it's my honor to welcome you all and our speaker, Professor Kathryn Ann Moler, to these distinguished lectures organized by the PolyU Academies for Interdisciplinary Research, PAIR. The topics of today's lectures is of high relevance and usefulness to PolyU and research institutions. Since Professor Moler will speak about the way in which Stanford has undertaken to strengthen Stanford's research developments in terms of research collaborations, resources management, and university governance. I'm sure that her sharing of Stanford's practice will provide useful references to university management and senior administrator joining us today. Stanford and PolyU are like-minded in some ways. In 2021, PolyU established PAIR, the largest interdisciplinary research platform in Hong Kong and also the Greater Bay Area, to foster interdisciplinary research, partnerships with well-renowned scholars, and technology transfer. Very similar to PolyU, Stanford University is also committed to fostering an interdisciplinary culture of collaborations that drives innovative discovery in areas vital to our world, health, and intellectual life. Stanford has been supporting interdisciplinary collaborations for decades. They have many university-wide interdisciplinary laboratories, centers, and institutes. I think both universities are committed to addressing critical global challenges with practical innovations and interdisciplinary solutions. In recent years, universities are expanding institutional research locally and overseas. We are seeing more international research collaborations, stronger links between universities, governments, and industry, more research into emerging technologies and the growing demands for capacity building in science, technologies, and innovations. These have a lot of implications to various aspects of higher education management. After all, how can we better prepare research university for the future? We need an infrastructure where faculties and graduate students are inspired to develop creative ideas. But how exactly can we achieve so? I'm sure that her sharing with us give us new thought and points to note about our future-oriented developments. Thank you very much. I wish you all enjoy the lectures today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Wang, for your opening remarks. Now I'd like to use the opportunity to introduce today's distinguished speaker. Professor Moler is a Vice Provost and Dean of Research Marvin Chodorow, professor and a professor of applied physics, and of engineering science and engineering at Stanford University. He is a world-renowned materials physicist and has held numerous leadership positions at Stanford. Professor Moler received a doctoral degree in physics from Stanford University in 1995. After 3 years as a postdoctoral fellow at Princeton University, she became the first female faculty members at Stanford's Department of Applied Physics in 1998. Professor Moler conducts research in magnetic imaging, develops tools that measures nanoscale magnetic fields and studies quantum materials and devices. He has authored and co-authored more than 80 scientific papers. Professor Moler is dedicated to promoting higher education excellence in many ways. Her dedication to teaching, research, and institutional development has had many honors. In terms of teaching, she received the American Association of Physics Teachers 2011 Reshmiya Award for Outstanding Leadership in Physics Education and was appointed in 2014 as the Safra Family Fellows in Undergraduate Education. In terms of research, she held a Packard Fellowship for Science and Engineering and received the Williams L. McLean Award. In terms of institutional development, Professor Moler is an advocate for the expanded faculty resources and the shared research facilities. He co-founded the Stanford Center for Probing the Nanoscale in 2013, leading the team to win an award to establish a national nanotechnology coordinated infrastructure site. In 2021, she co-led the transitional of the Stanford Dual School of Sustainability. Currently, Professor Moler oversees 5 shared research facilities and Stanford's 18 independent labs, institutes, and centers spanning various disciplines, as well as offices that support the research. Also, Professor Moler is a member of the National Academy of Science. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our distinguished speaker, Professor Kathryn Ann Moler.
Thank you for the warm welcome, and thank you also for the opportunity to visit your university. As the Deputy President and Provost said, I've already seen the ways in which PolyU and Stanford have quite a bit in common and quite a bit that we can learn from each other. We had some interesting discussions today, and I appreciate the chance to learn more about what you're doing here in terms of how you're building the university. I noticed that PolyU is a university that is very forward-looking. And while we cherish and honor what has come before and recognize the things that we do well, that we would like to continue doing, I see that PolyU does that. And I see that PolyU is also not afraid to look forward to what would be best to change and to continue to improve in the future. So I really appreciate the mutual exchange. Let me see. I will bring my laptop over here so that I can flip the slides forward easily. And I'm sorry for the formality of standing at a podium, but I think it's the easiest way to do things for here. So are my slides, I see. Yep, yeah. I have to share again. Give me 1 second. Zoom, share screen, desktop. And voila. Okay, good. So before I launch into some of the specific aspects of how we at Stanford think about designing the university for modern research teams, let me start by reviewing what the imperatives are that cause us to continue always asking how we can design the university. There are three reasons why universities conduct research. The first reason is to educate students. Actually, I think this phrasing in English, to educate students, it's a little bit too passive from the student perspective. I understand that the Chinese word, which I won't attempt to pronounce here, includes more of a concept of developing or giving the student the opportunity to develop themselves. And of course, that's the kind of research environment that we want to put together. We also conduct research to contribute to society and to understand the world. Just because we're humans, it's something that all humans share everywhere. It's part of our human nature to want to understand the world better and to try to use that understanding for the betterment and improvement of ourselves, our society, and our planet. You may already be familiar with the concept of Pasteur's quadrant. I want to talk you through this because I want to point out that basic research, fundamental understanding, the desire to understand, and applied research are not a binary. They're not in opposition to each other. So imagine that you have a graph on which the x-axis is your desire to understand the world, and your y-axis is the desire to make impact. Oops. Sometimes we say that a scientist who really wants to make impact is working in Edison's quadrant. Sometimes it's called Edison's quadrant, sometimes it's called Tesla's quadrant. Whereas a scientist who really wants to understand the world is not so interested in impact is in Bohr's quadrant. Actually, I think it's very ironic that this quadrant is usually called Bohr's quadrant because after all, Bohr is the person who maybe did the most to advance our understanding of the structure of the atom. And if there's been anything that's more applied in the 1900s and in the 2000s than understanding the structure of the atom, I don't know what it could be. And then the quadrant of the scientist who's very driven simultaneously by impact and by understanding nature is called Pasteur's quadrant. It's not an accident that this quadrant is the quadrant that is occupied by a bioscientist, because if you think about making applications in bioscience today, it's very often necessary to advance your understanding before you can make new applications. This way of thinking about things has been important to Stanford since the beginning. When Leland and Jane Stanford founded our university, they said in their founding grant that the institution should assist by experimentation and research in the advancement of useful knowledge and in the dissemination and practical application of the same. This and the education of students were the primary purpose for the founding of our university, Stanford. So this is a very standard way of thinking about research. The main point here is that, you really don't want to be too close to the origin. But in my experience, many scientists and engineers on even a daily basis move back and forth between Edison's quadrant, Bohr's quadrant, and Pasteur's quadrant. The desire to do basic research and the desire to do applied research that has a major transformational impact on the world, these two desires are not in opposition. And universities that treat them as if they are making a very foundational mistake and will be limited in what is the greatness of the application as well as the greatness of the understanding that they can achieve. Of course, in universities, we always have to consider the other axis, which is the education of our students. So the ways that researchers conduct research are changing, and universities can increase our impact by planning for modern ways of working. Let me describe 3 ways that universities are changing. First, changes in US government and other government research funding increasingly reward team science and large-scale collaborations between academic and non-academic organizations. Second, researchers increasingly need state-of-the-art resources at scale. We need space. I've noticed that PolyU is blessed in many ways. Having extra space does not seem to be one of those ways. We need access to data and computation infrastructure. We need scientific instruments. We need talent, and we need funding. Third, solving the most important challenges that we face as humans increasingly requires larger, more diverse, more flexible teams. This is simply what it takes to make progress at the frontiers of modern knowledge, where our knowledge has already expanded so much that the frontiers are increasingly complex. Research disciplines are more interconnected than ever before as a result of it. You might be trained as a physicist or a chemist or a biologist, but it's in the case for 30 years already that if you consider yourself a nanoscientist, the question of whether you're studying biology or physics or chemistry becomes irrelevant at that scale of the nanoscale. You really need to work on all three and need to understand them thoroughly. And that's only one of many, many examples where the modern frontiers need to draw on talents from multiple traditional disciplines. It's very common to talk about interdisciplinary research, multidisciplinary research, post-disciplinary research. I'm not such a fan of the term post-disciplinary research myself, but I recently learned a few years ago about the notion of transdisciplinary research. And I think that's maybe a good framing for what we need to do now in the modern world. With this background in mind, as William Bowen, the former president of Princeton University, said, the right model of shared governance going forward is not who owns what, but how all parties can work together effectively. And I chose to illustrate his remarks not with a picture of himself, President Bowen, but with a picture of a library at Princeton, where you can see that the traditional Princeton architecture, usually when you see a picture of Princeton, it looks like a picture of a old university, Harry Potter kind of thing, is really integrated in a beautiful work of architecture with something that's very modern and forward-looking. I noticed as we walked across campus this morning that Paula Yu's library similarly has a traditional building and then a very modern top floor. I want to bring this, before I start talking about my 3 examples of university design, I want to briefly bring this back to the student experience. The traditional view of a student in science, technology, engineering, and medicine is that we're striving to be geniuses, solitary workers, who are just simply propelled by our own brilliance and merit. Many of the stories that we're told as young scientists are stories of examples of such people. And when you become a graduate student in the traditional university, your experience as a graduate student is really bounded by the box of your own advisor. You typically have an advisor who has a laboratory, specific equipment in that laboratory, grants, a specific program to work on with those grants. And as a young scientist, you work very, very hard on this program, right? But the modern university can't be like that. And the modern student experience doesn't need to be like that. If you think about what this scientist is going to need as she does her research, she's probably going to need to do the greatest research possible. She's probably going to need to go beyond the equipment that seemed to be available to her when she started her project. She's going to need not only her own bench, she's going to need advanced microscopes, advanced synthesis facilities, advanced characterization facilities, the opportunity to get new samples, and the opportunity to speak to teams of researchers who are working on related problems. And then her results and the results of her team are probably looking at a problem that's very complex and has many different teams working on it so that all of the information can be shared. And when you think about the student experience, I feel it's imperative for us to design universities so that as faculty and students both have great ideas, they don't have to stop and say, I'm going to need an electron microscope. Let me write a proposal to get the money to get that electron microscope. And then 3 years from now, sorry, that student has graduated, but now we have the electron microscope. No. As university administrators, we have to try to create a world where the resources that the students need are there when the students need them so that they can move nimbly and more quickly. Okay, so the subject of my talk is designing universities for modern research teams. And I promised in my abstract to give you 3 examples. First, I'm going to talk about fostering collaborative planning and proposal writing. Second, I'm going to talk about planning for shared capabilities in experimental facilities, data, and computation. And third, I'm going to talk about transforming academic structures. And as you see, I would say that these 3 examples are sort of an increasing level of complexity and difficulty in what's popular to do in the context of a university that may have a conservative and static structure. So first, fostering collaborative planning and proposal writing. Successful research collaboration often begins by developing a compelling proposal. If you think about the life cycle of a research project, it moves from planning and developing the proposal to submitting the proposal and securing funding, to discovering and doing research. And of course, this is not a perfect circle, but it's iterative. As you discover and do research, you realize that your original plans were too naive and that they didn't meet the reality of your work. And so you refine your plans and maybe you need more funding. So we could draw lots of connecting arrows here. And then eventually you have achieved some scientific understanding or outcome and you can disseminate and share outcomes. So this really begins at the beginning though. And the beginning is planning the research and developing a proposal. People are very busy and it's very common that people continue to even actually especially really excellent people often continue to write proposals that maybe are not the most daring and complex proposals that they could possibly write. It's also a huge amount of work. The burden on faculty members writing proposals in every country in the world is really quite high. In fact, a survey that we did at Stanford showed that the greatest professional sources of faculty stress at Stanford in those schools that rely on outside research funding are, number one, finding time to do scholarship in the busy life of a professor, and number two, securing the funding for research. This is their greatest source of stress. And yet, planning and preparing proposals, especially the large proposals for large team grants, for shared resources, for collaborative proposals, are incredibly important. And it's not just that the professor needs to have the time, we also need the professor, we want the professor to have the mind share, to be working with their collaborators and their students to come up with truly creative and brilliant ideas. We don't want all the gears in the professor's brain to be stuck on the question of how to build the team proposal. So we set up a research development office that aims to strengthen collaborative research by helping to set teams up for funding success. This research development office helps research teams led by a faculty member to conceptualize a project, to conduct a feasibility study, and to obtain preliminary results. We give grants to give them the time and resources to be able to do that. We help them write the proposal and develop the proposal. We help them edit, we help them with graphics, we help them with developing broad outreach and impact plans, and we help them to assemble some peers who can do what we sometimes call a red team review of the proposal before it goes out, pretending to be an outside panel. We provide the service of a concierge, interfacing between the different internal officers that sign off on the proposal, and also importantly, interfacing between Stanford's and other institutions' offices. And we've actually found that when faculty are provided with the support from our PhD level research development proposal specialists, that they have a higher success rate. And we have quite a number of really heartwarming testimonials about how this helped them to plan their best possible research. But if they are not so lucky as to get funding the first time around, we also provide resubmission support based on the critiques of the grant. Whether the resubmission is the first time that they get the proposal and they have a chance to resubmit the same one, or they go back into another cycle, this process of improving proposals is very important. I really can't emphasize enough the fact that I don't see proposal writing as just an annoying administrative thing that faculty have to do. To me, when you sit down to write the proposal is really a chance for deep reflection. It's a chance to involve your students in the process of thinking about the work that you all want to do together. And it's just, there's so many resources, not enough resources, but still so many resources in the world as a whole being spent on research and development, that for all of us who write grants and then spend the money that we get from grants, we really have a very special responsibility to make sure that we do the best work that we can do. And that begins with early planning. So I'm really proud of the fact that our research development specialists are helping our faculty teams to propose their best work. That's just a little bit more about the services that we provide. Okay, The second example that I want to give you is about planning for shared capabilities in experimental facilities, data, and computation. Our ability to work at the forefront, not in every field, but in many fields or in many subfields, absolutely depends on having shared research platforms. Whether it's digital humanities and you need access to people who can help you analyze the data in your digital humanities work, or nanofabrication and you need access to some e-beam lithography system that will help you fabricate a material that you don't already have recipes for. The chance to get to the forefront and push the forefront forward, it's just no longer possible for every professor to have everything they need in their own laboratory. Many, many fields now are completely dependent on shared research platforms. There's a number of reasons why the value of shared research platforms is increasing. One is the interdisciplinary nature of research that I spoke about before. There's some things like a telescope, telescope mostly useful for astronomers, right? But there's other things like microscopes. Microscopes are useful to people in so many different fields. We have shared instruments in our facilities where the same instrument is used by people from dozens of different disciplinary departments. Another reason why shared research platforms are becoming more important to look at centrally is because of the increasing sophistication of instrumentation and necessary user support. On the one hand, the instruments are incredibly sophisticated and they can do a lot with the instruments. On the other hand, people who are not expert on the instruments can use them with extra help to get data in a day or a week that a generation ago would have taken years to acquire. The third reason is the scale of the data that can be analyzed and stored. This is true from social data to physical data to medical data. The opportunities for massive computation, clearly in the fields of machine learning and artificial intelligence, most obviously, but in many other fields as well. And also, frankly, due to security and data integrity imperatives, it's increasingly important that when we have data, we manage that data responsibly and make sure that that data is kept as private and secure as it's meant to be kept. And honestly, that is often better done in a shared facility than keeping the data on your own laptop or your own thumb drive as a private researcher. So we're weaving data and instrumentation into Stanford's research landscape. Just to give you some examples, for shared data resources, the Stanford Research Computing Center serves more than 6,500 active users, over 58 petabytes of data, 2.5 billion files, 2.2 thousand servers, 50,000 CPU cores, and more than 1,000 GPU cores. That's just our on-premise computing center. We also have a quite substantial cloud buy that we participate in as a group of researchers across all of Stanford. The Stanford Libraries is home to the Stanford Digital Repository, which has 1.3 petabytes and 225 million files. And data sets and user support are also available in the libraries and in several entities in our schools. I'll say a little bit more about our schools on the transforming structure slide. But for example, our School of Medicine, our Graduate School of Business have school-based entities that also provide data support. Our other priority is shared instrumentation. We have 33 distinct facilities that are set up as academic service centers. We have over $140 million of in-service capital assets. And in FY22, we had over $36 million of user fee income for our service centers. So it's a massive operation, although not nearly as massive as it needs to be for the next decade. We have over 1,700 internal users and 600 distinct faculty just outside the School of Medicine, with a similar number from inside the School of Medicine. And we build 174,000 internal user hours in FY21, again, just not even including the School of Medicine. So that's like 28 years of continuous 24/7 use. These facilities are really contributing a lot to the research and educational experience of Stanford researchers. So they've developed in a very ad hoc way under wonderful local ownership as we think about making a case for increased institutional investment in these shared facilities. We think about a number of different factors. We look for platforms to be both capable and accessible. So capability means that we can do new things with them. And when we think about accessibility, we think about what's the capacity. Can they do 1 experiment per year? Or can they do 1,000 experiments per year? What's the usability? Do you have to train for months before you can use it? Or can we adjust the usability so that someone who's never used that facility before can walk in and get decent data on it? And also, who pays for them and how affordable are they for researchers from different fields? There's been a multi-year, multi-stakeholder effort for basically 2 decades already, and this timeline is complicated and doesn't even include like all of the landmarks. But this is just to show that there's been a tremendous amount of planning at Stanford around what shared facilities we should have in data and instrumentation. And we've reached out and many members of the community have contributed ideas and thoughts to this planning effort. So let me say a little bit about our priorities first for data resources, and then I'll say something about our priorities for instrumentation resources. I'm just giving it a second to make sure the echo went away. Yeah, okay. So data resources, we can think of data resources spanning the research lifecycle. Again, there's lots of going backwards on this graph too, but just to talk about the forward progression, you start by gathering and generating data, and then you analyze the data, for which you need computing, storage, and analytical and technical support. And then you archive, reuse, share, and validate the data. And for that, you need both data sharing and data archiving. So all of these steps need to be considered in a modern data and computation facility. When we surveyed our researchers, we found that increased storage, compute, and backup are their highest priorities, but they also put quite a bit of importance on data acquisition processes, data sharing platforms, archiving, data risk assessment processes, the availability of data sets, assistance, engineering, and code are all things that are still useful to a very significant number of resources. So it's quite complicated to think about all the factors that go into making your shared data platforms as useful as possible. To summarize 4 main outcomes of our planning, we are making a major investment in core data infrastructure and services that meet the needs of researchers today. We're providing a secure home for research data with backup. We've created a roadmap for researchers to navigate data resource platforms. And we've also invested in useful data sets that can be put in reach efficiently for researchers with centralized scalable storage option for high-risk data, meaning data that we don't want to have shared unless it was meant to be shared. So these 4 core needs are the most important part coming out of the Stanford planning. So I'm tempted to launch into some stories of students and the kind of things that they're doing where they suddenly realize, oh, wait a minute, I could really use satellite data from South Africa from 30 years ago and how they go about getting that. But I'm sure you can imagine the use cases. And I want to get to the point where all of you are asking questions and making comments. So shared instrumentation. We have 4 broad areas for our shared instrumentation priority. For hardware, we have 2 types of tools, roughly speaking: workhorse tools that are tools that can just get the data over and over again on many different experiments, and leading edge tools where you can do stuff that's really at the cutting edge. People. So the facility users are in some ways the most important people. They really address a number of global challenges through their research. But the facility staff who support the users, operate the equipment, bring it to life, and teach the users, those facility staff are really the hero of the modern research university. So if there's any facility staff or any facility directors who are listening here, I just want to give you a huge shout out. We offer services that enable experiential education, accelerate pilot study design, and help collect and analyze data. And finally, it's really important to have space. The space needs to be state-of-the-art infrastructure with, for example, excellent temperature control, low electromagnetic interference, low vibrations, et cetera, et cetera. There's endless lists of specifications for the space. And of course, first you need to have the space before you can even worry about its technical specs. And you need enough space to facilitate collaboration and ongoing expansion of your capabilities. You do not want your new shared facilities to be completely full on the day that they're open, because some new instruments will be coming along. What came out of our instrumentation planning was a multi-year plan to upgrade aging workhorse equipment to modern standards, a multi-school collaboration to invest in new scientific capabilities to seed research discoveries in the near term, and a grant program to make instruments affordable to experiential learning and shared facilities and new faculty users. And I just want to share how incredibly important making shared instrumentation affordable for experiential learning was. One person wrote that it's so much more engaging for the students to see the instruments in person. The students loved it. Another person wrote that it's an incredibly valuable program that helps students internalize their learning in a way that lectures and homework simply can't provide. Many students described this as a transformative experience, a lab course that allowed them to study the mechanisms of learning in their own brain. And my favorite piece of faculty feedback from a student who taught under this pilot program was so many aha moments from the students working in the shared facilities. I really see data and computation in shared facilities as being like the library. You can imagine a world, imagine a university where shared research capabilities are as widely available as library books. Whether it's data, modeling, imaging, making, creating, characterizing, that's the data that you need. You can think back to what it might be like to have, thank you. You can think back to what it might be like to just have your own books. Imagine what the university would be like if you didn't have the internet and you didn't have a library and you just had your own books, or maybe your professor's books. We take it completely for granted that any written information that you want from anywhere in the world, you can just go to the library or go to the internet and get that information. Now imagine if research capabilities were that easily available. You suddenly realize you need a specialized microscope, a specialized reagent, some help in how to use that microscope and that reagent, and you're able to get it just as easily as checking out a book from the library. That's the experience that we should all want all of our students to be having in the modern research university. Okay, third example is transforming academic structures. Stanford has 7 schools. I just added this slide this morning, so I don't know, I didn't have time to completely optimize the colors. But Stanford has 7 schools, and these circles represent roughly the relative size of the schools. Humanities and science in terms of the number of academic council members, the number of professors in each school. Humanities and sciences is the biggest, medicine is the second biggest. Stanford also lowers the barriers and increases the resources for collaboration across departments by fostering cross-disciplinary institutes, much like you do here at PolyU in pair. And we've been comparing notes on our relative systems, and I think learned something useful for both institutions. These are the independent academic units that we currently have at Stanford: Humanities and Social Science Centers, Humanities Center, Longevity, Advanced Study in the Behavioral Sciences, the Policy Institutes, International Studies, Economic Policy, Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence, Energy and the Environment, the Life Science Institutes, BioX, WUSI Neuroscience, Seraphin Chemistry, Engineering, and Medicine for Human Health, WUSI Human Performance Alliance, and 6 physical science labs and institutes, 3 of which are joint between Stanford and our neighboring national laboratory, the SLAC National Accelerator Laboratory. So this strategy has served Stanford very well, and our last president, John Hennessy, really accelerated this strategy and created a number of these institutes. You can't tell from the slide, but they're very disparate. They range in size from annual budgets of $1 million to annual budgets of well over $50 million US for the largest of these institutes. We recently, with our current president and provost, have had a long-range planning process. And during this long-range planning process, we solicited ideas from all of our community members, and they talked about ways that the university could achieve our founding purpose of promoting the welfare of people everywhere. So there were a number of ideas ranging from the need to have fried chicken in the student union, all the way up to more aspirational ideas, one of which came up over and over again in the long-range planning process, was that Stanford needs to do something of scale for sustainability. Prior to 2022, this is the constellation of academic units at Stanford in which there were sustainability efforts being undertaken. In fact, most of these units still do sustainability efforts, and I don't necessarily call this a problem. This is actually kind of an asset, but they were happening in a lot of different places. As we did the long-range planning, researchers identified multiple interdisciplinary scholarship areas and asked that those areas be integrated into one school. Climate change, earth and planetary sciences, energy technology, sustainable urban development, the natural environment, food and water security, human society and behavior, human health and its relation to the environment. People would over and over again say things like, I'm a political science professor. I'm known for being a political science professor. My PhD is in political science. That's my reputation. But I wake up every day and I think about how can I use my knowledge of political science to make the world a more sustainable place. And I want to be in an academic unit where everybody else wakes up in the morning and thinks, how can I make the world a more sustainable place with people from all disciplines working together on these interdisciplinary problems in new transdisciplinary fields. And people said during the planning process, the community that's engaged in sustainability research and education needs the superpowers of institutes and the superpowers of a school. In the Stanford system, the superpowers of schools are to admit students, hire and promote faculty, build and own curricula, and grant degrees. The superpowers of institutes are to foster interdisciplinary intellectual communities and to partner with external stakeholders to identify critical knowledge gaps, co-create accessible and actionable knowledge, and test and scale effective solutions. And so we set out to say, can we design a school? Stanford hasn't made a new school in 70 years, right? People were kind enough during lunch to tell me that the name of Stanford is associated with innovation. We've been innovative in many ways. We haven't been innovative in terms of the structure of our schools. We haven't had a new school in 70 years. And it just seemed like this was the time to do it. So in 2022, Stanford announced the creation of the Stanford Doerr School of Sustainability, our first new school in 70 years. And we built it on sort of a three-part structure. The school is led by a dean. I have the honor of being the transition dean to help to be the dean of the transition, to knit everything together. And the founding dean is Dean Arun Majumdar, who is a mechanical engineer, who's an expert in energy, and was the founding director of the Advanced Research Projects Agency for Energy in the Obama administration. The school has departments which do the functions that departments traditionally do, and also within the school, we have themed initiatives and institutes which foster interdisciplinary research, usually use-inspired research, and we have a sustainability accelerator designed to ensure that this research reaches practice. All other schools and units are able to participate in the new school activities, either by having traditional faculty joint appointments with new school departments, or by participating in the themed initiatives and institutes, or by participating in the programs of the Sustainability Accelerator. We also welcome external partners very strongly into this school. These are some of the names of the departments in the school, and these are some of our themed initiatives that sit within a structure that contains 3 institutes. And of course, all of this structure is very much designed to be informed by the world and in turn to hopefully impact the world in a positive way through interdisciplinary sustainability research that can be put into action. I'm going to skip over some of the details of the Sustainability Accelerator so that I can move on time to thanking you so much again for the invitation to come and really inviting your comments and your questions, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Moler, for your very inspiring talk. I really learned quite a lot, even as a pretty senior faculty member here. So by this hearing your lecture, I think it's very beneficial for us to rethink how that research and change our institution. As you mentioned that PolyU now is doing that, so we set up a pair. It's the way. So now we will open the floor for Q&A. So if first I would like to give an opportunity for the audience in this room, and then I will also read a few questions from the Zoom. So if you wanted to ask questions, you can just raise your hand and then turn on the mic. Ask your question, please.
Thank you, Professor Moler, for so many very useful, valuable information. So my question is about the data sharing, because you talk about a lot for the sharing of the facilities, and I think that is less political issue, is more on the management. But for data sharing, and some of the data I understand, if someone did produce the data from the facility, not a problem to share. But some of the data, because of the design of the parent work, is a kind of power or something. And so in such a case, the one to generate the data may not like to share with others. How is the experience? Do you require all the people doing the experiment work in the facilities to share, or there's a mechanism to encourage?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that the sharing data is a political issue as well as a management issue. So I think the question right now in the modern world and in the current geopolitical situation of what data should be shared when and by whom, which I don't know, we might dream that there was a past where that was just a decision of the researchers. And I think that that way of thinking is under consideration in countries around the world, as we all know. So I think it's very important to have, so I think it's very understandable and appropriate that individuals and companies and nations would want to protect their data for many valid and valuable reasons. What I think is very important is to distinguish, to have clear expectations to distinguish when data is meant to be shared and when it is not meant to be shared, so that there isn't confusion about it, and then to honor the commitments that you make. So if as a university, you accept money to do from a company or from a government to do research that should be kept secret, then as a university, you must ensure that you have the power to follow through on keeping that data secret. Conversely, if you're doing open research, which is the kind of research that Stanford does, then the decision of when the data is ready to be shared should be left in the hands of the researchers. So I think it's very important to have data security that keeps data secure when it should be secure, and then enables the sharing in a clear way when it's ready to be shared. The question of then how you share the data and also how you archive it, as you said, is an issue, a very, very important management issue, and is also a really important resource issue. I mean, the question of which platforms you use for data sharing and which other people use those platforms and how long the data is archived for and who's paying for the data to be archived. Those are all really important questions of management. Yeah. Thank you.
I like to read the questions from the internet. Is the university planning a once a decade kind of a thing, or was it motivated? How was the planning done? Did you hire an outside consulting company to the areas and the process?
Yeah, Well, I would say we're continually planning all the time, and I'm sure that all of you are too. I think universities plan and plan and plan and plan, right? Whether it's someone is planning their PhD thesis and they have to report their thesis proposal. I don't know what year you do that here. We, in our school, in our university, it depends on the department. In my departments, it's typically in the second year, there's one iteration, and the fourth year, there's another iteration, and the third year, there's another, where you present your thesis proposal. That's a kind of planning. When you write a grant, that's another level of planning. I'm sure your departments make hiring plans. Maybe, I don't know how often, but it's pretty common to have sort of a running 5-year plan is a strategy that works for a lot of people. Like you say, this year, we think this is our plan for 5 years, but we've reserved the right to update the plan next year if we want to. So there's constantly planning going on at every level. Stanford, when we got our new president and provost 6 years ago, they embarked on a long-range planning process. The question asked how we did it, so I'll go a little bit into the mechanics. I hope it's not too boring because it's a long story. But first we invited the members of the Stanford community, students, faculty, staff, alumni, to submit ideas. Then we appointed 4 area steering groups, each of 25 members, in 4 different areas. Research and education were 2 of them, to read all of the proposals and curate them. Then coming out of that, there were 27 ideas that were moved forward to another stage, and those 27 ideas each had a design team that worked on how to implement them. And then after those design teams were done, most of them still required another range of planning after that. So I would say this massive planning effort was probably a once every 10 years-ish effort. Yeah, it really surfaced a lot of ideas.
Thank you very much. Any further questions from the audience in the room? Professor Lee.
Professor Moler, yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. For our research institutes, we all the faculty member actually, they are from different departments. So we actually don't have dedicated, faculty. What about your institute? Do you have like dedicated faculty, or do you hire actually faculty for the institute?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm actually going to get back to the slide that lists our institutes in order to answer it, because it depends on the institute. Let's see if I can go back here. Okay. So, sorry. Okay, well, for our, I'll just list them off. So our humanities and social science centers do not have the ability to hire faculty. The faculty in the schools participate in those centers on a volunteer basis, I would say. The policy institutes in the late 1990s, our Stanford Faculty Senate, which actually meets in a room that's very much like this room. Our Stanford Faculty Senate created a new category of members of the Academic Council, which are called senior fellows, and stated that the policy institutes, of which there are now 5 policy institutes, international studies, economics, human-centered artificial intelligence, environment, and energy. Each of those institutes can hire senior fellows who are members of the Academic Council and have almost all of the powers of professors. Okay. Our physical science labs and joint SLAC Stanford institutes, which are also physical science, again, do not hire faculty. Faculty from the departments and SLAC faculty participate in those institutes because of the intellectual mission and resources associated with the institutes. And then our interdisciplinary life science institutes have what I think is actually a really wonderful model. So we have 4 such institutes, and they basically do not have the power to hire faculty on their own, but they have billets and money. And so what they do is they gather together willing departments, a coalition of the willing. So for example, you might have bioengineering, chemical engineering, the genetics department, and the chemistry department might all join together to do a search for a faculty member that might be of interest to any of those 4 departments and will be of interest to the Seraphin ChemH Institute. And those searches have resulted in some really spectacular scholars. In some cases, scholars that the departments had wanted to recruit for a long time, but that we were able to recruit to Stanford by bringing the power of the institutes and showing that all of these different departments would welcome the faculty. So I would say we've tried several different experiments on how to do it. And as you can tell, this mechanism of having billets and money, but looking for willing partners, that is my favorite method. I think it's really important that the departments be deeply bought into this process when a faculty member will be a member of both the department and the institute. And I'm looking forward to the chance to talk more about how that works here. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So next question will be from the Zoom. This look like probably you professor is asking. You talk about the shared research facilities. At the PolyU, the research the facilities are mainly used to be shared for research, but because our space is very limited, sometimes we find it's not always easy to share. And during lunch, you also talk about the Stanford has a similar problem, because at the PolyU, we often joke and say that money is not the problem, but the space. So if the Stanford has a similar problem, what is the alternative solution?
So was the question how to optimize the shared facilities when we have limited space, basically? Yes, that's very difficult. So actually, first of all, one thing that we've been doing for quite a while now is that actually, since I was an assistant professor myself, we've had teams at Stanford who saw the value of shared facilities and set aside space for shared facilities whenever a new building is built. Of course, if you don't have space to be building in a new buildings, that strategy doesn't help as much. But you can always optimize and repurpose space. It can be quite difficult to do, but sometimes it needs to happen. Then within the shared facility space that we have, and also within the budget that we have for shared instrumentation, this is actually a good moment maybe for me to introduce Ms. Serena Rao, who's my Senior Associate Dean for Finance and Administration and has been very active in this process and ensuring that it runs smoothly. We have a process that we call the C# process, which is a process by which we solicit proposals for shared instrumentation and analyze those proposals, and then determine through a committee process what is the highest priority for new instrumentation. In some cases, that means that we have to move things around a little bit in shared facilities. And we're constantly reviewing the usage of shared facilities to make sure that the shared facilities that we have are really providing a really good use of the limited space that we have. So I think a process like that, a process of constantly or regularly reviewing your existing shared facilities, both for their financial sustainability and for their impact, and also having a systematic process for getting input from the community on what are the best new shared facilities is what I recommend. And the third thing that I'll say is that, again, with quite a bit of help from Ms. Rao and others on the staff, we have actually identified some spaces that can be repurposed for providing an expansion of our shared facility space. It's not new space, but it's space that wasn't being fully utilized, and we were able to repurpose it for shared facilities. Yeah. And then the last thing is we hope to someday get permission from the county to build another building for shared facilities. Yeah.
Thank you. I think the suggestions is very useful. Maybe I should read one more question from the because by looking at these spin-offs and other companies created by alumni, faculty, and students, Stanford has a huge impact. So we like to encourage this as well. So the question is here, how what Stanford has done to encourage the special policies.
Yeah, well, I think we've been very lucky that way. I certainly can't take any credit for the magic of Silicon Valley and Stanford's contribution to the research, to the nation's economy in that way, because it began much before my time. And so when I stepped into this role, I inherited a tradition and a culture of again, seeking to create knowledge and apply knowledge in ways that benefit people, which often is through the economy, not always, but often. And it seems to me that PolyU has also such a tradition. And that's one of the reasons why I think exchanges between us is valuable. We have some policies that are pretty useful. One of them is that our faculty can consult for outside entities for 13 days per quarter. So that works out to 1 day per week. And they use that time to very good advantage to work with industry. That's actually a faculty senate policy. And the policy, states and explains that the reason why they have that opportunity is also because having faculty who are engaged in the world in that way is good for the educational environment. So that's a very important point. We also have a very strong Office of Technology Licensing, and our Office of Technology Licensing kind of works to help faculty and students learn what kind of technology might be useful and what to do about that. We also benefit from a number of entrepreneur programs in different parts of the university, which I could tell you about in more detail, but I highly recommend entrepreneur programs, especially for students, but also for faculty. And then finally, we are lucky enough to live in an environment where, there are just quite a few people in the area who are looking for things to invest in. And I think that's very helpful. But I imagine that's also true here in Hong Kong. Yeah.
Well, quite a lot of similarities. Yeah. One thing about like 1 week of consulting, yes, we have. My question is for the charge and the overhead consulting job performed by faculty members.
No, we do not. And I think if we did, there would be a revolt. Yeah.
That's a difference. Charge overhead.
Oh, okay. I hope I wasn't in politics then. I mean, I think, yeah, we also have a very generous leave policy. So faculty can take a leave of absence for up to 2 years, as long as their department chair and dean agree, which they usually do. So when you hear about Stanford faculty being CEOs and founders of companies, that's not usually while they were faculty members. It's usually they took a leave of absence so they could devote themselves full time to the company.
Yeah, that's a policy. So I'd like to see any further questions. Yes, please.
Thank you, Professor Moler. I'm a Stanford alumnus. I work as a postdoc at Department of Geophysics. Was Andrew back then,
excellent.
School of Earth. Now it's Andrew was the new dual school of ability. So first of all, I'd like to congratulate you and the Stanford team for launching a new and exciting school. You mentioned that, well, it's also exciting, but it's also one of most complicated and difficult process out of the 3 topics you mentioned today. So what I was curious, what were the major obstacles that you were facing internally and externally during the creation of the new school, and how did you overcome those difficulties and challenges?
Oh yeah, thank you. That's a great question. And also, I'm very fond of the geophysics department. So yeah. I think a lot of people really wanted, well, I think everybody wanted to see Stanford do something significant and something of scale in the area of sustainability. The question is, what would that look like? And I think academics, I think the biggest issue is that your department is kind of like your home or your family, and your identity tends to be very much related to your department, right? When people learn that I'm a physicist, right, it kind of says something about who I am. And the idea of shaking all that up, I think, is very difficult for any university. And it was certainly difficult at Stanford. So people could see that there could be something really great, but they couldn't be sure that it would be greater than what they had. So I think the first thing was just to have lots and lots of conversations among students, among faculty, among staff, among alumni, lots and lots of conversations about what it could look like, and to be a little bit patient so that people could visualize themselves. People could see themselves and imagine what the environment that they were helping to create would do for them. Also very helpful to keep people focused on future generations and imagine what the environment that they're creating would do for future generations. And then, of course, another barrier was resources. So in order to build a new school, you actually need, not just enthusiasm and a plan, you also need space and money. And some very generous philanthropists, who I'm just incredibly deeply grateful to, step forward to make that possible. Yeah.
It's asking when you open a new, they might also close. Or how you determine which closing?
Yeah, well, we actually did more evolving than closing. So of the units that I showed you on the slide with the constellation of different units, the Woods Institute for the Environment, the Precourt Institute for Energy, the Civil and Environmental Engineering Department, the Stanford School of Earth, and its departments all merged into the school. And some of them then transformed. So there was, for example, a Department of Energy Resources Engineering, which used to be a Department of Petroleum Engineering. And it submitted a plan to expand and change its name from Energy Resources Engineering to Energy Science and Engineering. And then it reached out across the members of that department reached out across the university to recruit scientists and engineers in different parts of the university who were really working on clean, green energy, which some of the people in the old department were doing as well, of course, and most of the people in the old department. And this brought together a very interdisciplinary group of energy researchers and really broadened the mission of the department tremendously. So it wasn't necessary to close down the old department. Actually, in the summer of, I guess, 2022, we submitted proposals to the advisory board for 2 new departments. One was this energy department, and the other was a new Department of Oceans. So for the new Department of Oceans, the faculty of the Hopkins Marine Station, who previously had mostly been in the biology department, got together with oceans-related researchers from a number of other departments across the university, and they formed a new oceans department. It was actually, they wrote a very inspiring proposal for an oceans department, which again might be of interest here in Hong Kong. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Now I will see any further questions on this one.
Hi, Professor Moler. This is Xin Yu, and I was the postdoc at Stanford for about 2 years. And I just joined PolyU at the end of 2020. I think Stanford has a close connection with Silicon Valley, where it has so many high-tech companies. While Hong Kong is also located nearby the Great Bay Area, which is also considered as the innovation center in Asia. And I am wondering if you can share some suggestion to young faculty member and how to handle with the similar environment. I think at this moment, Hong Kong and Stanford has the similar external environmental, which is a great place for high technology?
That's a great question. I want to turn it back to you. What do you think is most important for young faculty to think about in this environment?
I think the most important thing, maybe in my opinion, is keep the curiosity. And because only when you have the curiosity, you have the co-motivation to pursue the new things and make the new innovation. Yeah, but that is just my humble opinion.
I completely agree with that. And I think my advice then would be definitely keep the curiosity. And also, as a practical matter, I think speaking to your colleagues in your department and your students about your curiosity and the topics of your curiosity, and trying to be both a follower and a leader would be very valuable both for you and for other people. So that as you or as a hypothetical young faculty member, explores the options that are available with industry, and I assume also with government in the Greater Bay Area, and you learn new things, that you make sure that you're bringing those back to your department and your colleagues and your students and sharing them with them. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, that's a question from the Zoom asking, now the AI is being applied in almost all the field. Does Stanford have an AI platform to support different interdisciplinary research?
Well, AI at scale is very, very expensive. So I would say we're working on it. Yes. Yeah.
The another very different question is about we try to make different changes that really requires a lot of investment, and for Stanford you have a very big endowment and the big institution, you probably can do it. But for some very small universities in Hong Kong, limited resource, making this type of changes. So do you have any advice of institutions?
Yes, I want to be a little bit humble in answering the question because I recognize that being a professor at Stanford is and then a Stanford administrator is a very, very lucky position to be in. And so I don't want to seem like I'm in any way giving advice that doesn't recognize the difficulties that other universities can face in the modern world. It's also true that even though we do get a lot of press about how big our endowment is, it doesn't go as far as you might expect. So we do still have to worry about costs within Stanford. And of course, much of our endowment is intended for particular purposes, and we don't have the ability to just spend the money however we want. So that said, I would say that I could imagine that a smaller place could actually be quite a bit more nimble and quite a bit easier to move. I would say rather than trying to do things the same way that you always have, as a smaller place, you might have the opportunity to be more innovative and more daring, and to seek out new resources because you might be able to move more quickly than a larger place would. I happen to think that both Stanford and PolyU seem to be able at times to move relatively quickly. But I could imagine that a smaller university could have less momentum that is harder to redirect. Yeah. I also think that a smaller university may have more opportunity to have relationships and to appeal to donors, because I think you could have someone, a benefactor could really make a huge difference very quickly in a small place. So that might be attractive.
Thank you. Yes, more questions.
Hi, Professor. So thank you for your sharing. So my name is Charleston Sin. I work for Cisco in Silicon Valley and VMware for about 20 years. And my question is about when I remember that when I was in San Jose, working for Cisco, Cisco and also with Stanford have very close working relationship. Now I'm a professor of practice, teaching part-time at the PolyU. Now the questions is my questions to you is how would Stanford engage industry people to share the experience in addition to make it more as a course or the curriculum material. So how would Stanford actually doing that, and how should PolyU be more leveraging the industry people in that regard?
Thank you. Well, it sounds like PolyU is doing a good job by having you as a professor of practice. So that's a good start. At Stanford, we have many faculty who are adjunct professors who come from industry. They may teach classes or they may not teach classes. They may mentor students. I think that kind of interaction is very important, just to invite people to give seminars, come to visit campus, especially chatting with students is very, very important. I've known actually a pretty decent number of graduate students who had decided not to go on in academia, who got wonderful jobs in Silicon Valley simply by attending seminars that were given by industry leaders who came to campus to give seminars and then speaking to them after the seminar. So I definitely think inviting people to come and give talks, both because of their positions in the companies, and also I'm sure PolyU has many alum who are successful in companies, and having the alum come back to campus can be especially motivating.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
For sharing.
Yeah.
All right, I will read one more question from the internet. Regarding your experience in intention, have you experienced any resistance that the people normally will like? So if you have a problem, what type of strategies you use to post issues?
Yeah, I think it's very important to try to make things a win-win. It's a very rare case where it would ever be necessary in a university to try to do things that aren't a win-win. Of course, sometimes you need to, and then it's best to be, I would say, sort of clear and kind and compassionate, but also, clear and maybe quick. Right. So if you have to sunset something, it's important to make it clear that you're sunsetting it. Sunset is a word that we use to mean shut down. It's kind of a nicer word. So if you have to sunset something, it's good to make it clear that you're sunsetting it, and to be clear about why, and to provide a ramp down plan that makes sense for people. Try to help people have a soft landing. But usually really it's best to try to make things a win-win and keep talking until you figure out what a win-win may be. In the case of Stanford, we have benefited from having a strong provost. And so I think the provost has a very important role to play in any kind of academic change, either providing resources or just sort of brokering the discussion. So as we were forming the Stanford Doerr School of Sustainability, there were a number of times when we just had sort of several people get together for drinks and just talk things out.
Thank you. Now I'd like to see if there's last questions from this audience.
If there are any students in the room, I suspect that in the room, there is some student who has a question that they haven't asked yet. At Stanford, our Center for Teaching and Learning teaches us that if you want the students to ask questions, you sometimes need to wait an uncomfortably long period of time until they feel comfortable that you really want them to.
Yeah, now it's the last minute. If you don't ask, you will lose the chance forever. Okay, maybe they are still thinking. Let me ask a last question from the internet.
Okay.
Pair here at the PolyU is a virtual. Because of the very limited space, we don't have a luggage by the center together. So let's really done adversity. I know that you under your purview, there's a lot of interdisciplinary research units at Stanford. You'll be able to advise to manage this type of virtual.
Well, I think there's I don't know, what are the things that motivate people? There's space, there's money, there's interest, there's time, So I think in the modern world, space is, as long as people have enough space, it's no longer as necessary for that space to be co-located as it once was. So maybe your university can kind of find little pieces of space over time and make it possible for pair to have some space that it can allocate, even if that space isn't all co-located. But even without that, I think if you can do things to identify interesting, important, impactful, interdisciplinary problems for people to work on, give them resources to work on those problems, and maybe help them in some way to free up some of their time, whether it's teaching relief or better staff support or additional student researchers, then you can really keep your institutes healthy that way.
A very good advice. Thank you. We have the final questions here. Yes, please.
One of your comment earlier was really struck me that you are thinking about all the students as much as possible that they should take entrepreneurship. And then you said that also the professor. Can you comment a bit more on that? Why you think that entrepreneurship to the student and the faculty member are important?
Yes, definitely. So I don't necessarily think that all students should take up entrepreneurship because I think not all students are suited to be entrepreneurs or want to be entrepreneurs. I just think that the university should provide environments in which students who do want to learn about entrepreneurship can learn about it, whether they become the founder of a big company or a small company, or whether they just know more about how companies work and they can take that forward into whatever they do next. They should have the opportunity to learn about it if they choose to do so. Yeah, thank you.
All right, any questions from our graduates here?
I guess they'll ask me tomorrow.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. You know, tomorrow, Professor Moler will have a Q&A session on it with our graduate students, which will be organized by the graduate school. So before finish this, I would like to present a small souvenir to Professor Moler. Very good. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you very much. Okay, before we finishing this, I have a little bit of announcement. Yeah, well, for this academic year, I think this will be our last distinguished lecture organized by pair. But next month, we'll have the first pair conference. This pair conference, it's a title Research Excellence for Societal Impact, because the pair not only doing the research, we wanted to have our research into results, which will help to change the society. And this will be a 4 days conference organized by pair. Next 2 slides here. But anyway, our plenary session speaker will be Professor Yan, who many of you know that just recently came back from Princeton University. So she is establishing this medical research academy here in Shenzhen. So we will be the keynote speaker, and her title the title of her talk will be targeting nerve channels for pain relief. It sounds very technical, but actually her talk will be a lot of interesting. So I will encourage you guys to register, because that will be a free for you. Then, in addition to the this plenary session, we also have a number of invited talks. So next slide, please. Yes, those are the speakers of our invited speakers from all over the world. It's probably the fonts are too small for you to see. They are very famous on their respective field. So I will encourage you to join us next month for this peer conference. So you can look at our website for the program, and I think there will be educational to some of you. Thank you very much. And this session is closed. Thank you.